Hi, my name is Jenny Castle, and I'm here for the Rose Center of the Arts Forsberg Art Gallery in Longview, Washington. I'm here talking with Jessica Tawczynski, who is an artist living and working in Brooklyn, New York. Jessica, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for having me.
Can we start the interview with you talking a little bit about your background and your path to becoming an artist?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in the Worcester area of Massachusetts, and I went to UMass Lowell for my BFA and Mass College of Art for my MFA in 2D media. Um, During high school, I was actually a sculpture and ceramics kind of maker. I made a lot of uh, steel things, lots of pots, lots of working with my hand and everything. And I grew up going to the Worcester Art Museum, and through that, I was kind of engaged with painting a little bit more. I went to community college for my first year of college before going to UMass Lowell, and there I took my first painting class, and I kind of fell in love with the medium. And during that time, I was actually an animation major. And so a whole lot of my life kind of changed during that moment. And that's when I kind of found out that, wow, somebody could actually be a fine artist for a career.
So you've worked in a lot of different mediums. Do you feel like you pull from different skills you've learned all throughout your art career, even in your current work?
Yeah, so throughout my education, I've been primarily a painter, but then after graduating from Mass Art, I started focusing more on the printmaking aspect of my practice and drawing aspect. And right now, I am still making oil paintings, but a lot of my work is assemblage. And I've been thinking a lot about interaction and what it means to make a tactile piece, and giving thought behind a lot of the materials that I'm using. And I think that that comes from my background as a sculptor, as well as some influence I've had from going on residency to Iceland in the past few years.
So, how many times have you gone to Iceland over the past few years?
Three. And it's been on a residency at Gylfalagud, and also Listhus Art Space in Ólafsfjörður, and then the Akureyri Museum of Art, all in northern Iceland.
Um, so you keep returning to the same place. I was going to ask you a little bit about what is currently driving your art practice and where you're finding inspiration. Do you think it's linked to that place? It seems you keep returning to it despite living in New York City. So, what is your relationship with place, and how's that manifesting itself in your work?
Yeah, so while I'm in Iceland, the first time I went there, I didn't want to make paintings necessarily because it was actually my first residency and the longest time I have spent abroad. So I decided to go there with the idea to just make a series of drawings. And then I went on several hikes, and I ventured into the highlands a little bit, and I started seeing a lot of the textures of the rocks and the lichen and the moss and everything there. So I actually started printing the ground and bringing it back into the studio and making collages with those monotype prints. And so I guess the connection I have is mostly to the landscape there.
So, when you're back in New York, do you find it harder to be inspired, or are you finding similar inspirations in your studio here in the States?
When I'm back in New York, I think that the inspiration I have is thinking about layering. And New York is kind of an interesting place because you see a lot of art and graffiti all over the buildings, and there's these layers of different people and different voices. And you see it in the architecture when buildings are 100 years old and then they've kind of been renovated in some new way. But that's 50 years ago, and now it's been renovated again. And So yeah, the difference of architecture and, vibrant colors everywhere. There's lots of advertisements and everything here. So when I'm back in New York, I tend to make these paintings with really bright synthetic colors. Uh, so I think maybe that's the influence of the New York landscape in my work.
Throughout your art career, are there any artists in particular that stand out that have influenced your work and helped move it forward?
Yeah, I would say too many to name. But right now, I'm really interested in looking at Jack Whitten's work. Love Jack Whitten. And Hilma af Klint, Ronnie Horn, Julie Moretu, a lot of Duchamp lately, and Terry Winters. Love Terry Winters' prints. So I would say those artists mostly.
You made the joke too many to name. Do you feel like looking at work of other artists has been important for you, especially during your years when you were educating yourself as an artist? I mean, do you feel like that's an important part of your practice, is pausing and looking at work versus just making all the time?
Yeah, I would say that when I was at UMass Lowell, it was during, that period in my life when I was kind of switching over from sculpture or, computer-based art to painting and drawing mostly. And I hadn't really been influenced by many artists that were making in that way. And so when I went there, I started learning about all of this different art history that I had no idea about, and especially contemporary art. I didn't even know it existed for the most part. So, I always have a journal on hand and I draw all the time, but half of my journal is just full of writing and full of names and people that I can go back to and look at. And of course, a lot of my practice, I think, is actually half in the studio and half not in the studio.
Yeah.
And as a maker, I think a lot of us spend most of our time observing, a lot and being curious about the world and experiencing the world outside of our studio. So, of course, looking at different artists' work is part of that.
Do you have any advice for any young artists or students who are trying to keep art at the center of their lives despite um, other obligations and responsibilities they may have?
To be authentic to yourself. A lot of the time when I was a young artist, I would be reaching and trying to find advice from different interviews myself. Just because I was questioning a lot of what I was doing, and I needed to seek out other people that were a little bit older and more experienced and let them kind of show me that this kind of life I'm choosing for myself was possible and doable. And when I was young and went to my BFA program, I had to move away from my family and everything. And so finding this kind of authentic voice for myself was really important. And so never lose sight of your core values and what you want to achieve. And I think that a lot of the times, in order to find that voice, you'd have to take a lot of risks in your work. So don't let fear hold you back either. That would be my greatest advice, I think.
I think that that's great advice. Jessica is part of a group show that will be at the Forsberg Art Gallery this fall called A Quiet Stand. Jess, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and I look forward to the show.